Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1301A, and today's date is June 8th, 2017, and the title of the episode is, The Central Bankers Have Been Using the Last 9 Years to Protect Themselves. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, let's go out to Greece here, because Greece, well, they're in quite a bit of trouble right now, and we understand they're in the process of taking on more debt because of the bailout situation with the central banks. And by taking on more debt, what they need to do is they need to implement more austerity on the people. And Greece's creditors, they're asking for the freezing of pensions for an additional year until 2022. Before it was 2021, now it's 2022. And we could see right now that to receive more of this debt, this is what they need to do. Now, a lot of people are not going to receive their pensions. Pensions are going to be frozen, and this is going to be a problem for the people. Now, for those people who are in the 1%, those people who are in government, they're not going to be worrying about this. But the everyday person who is struggling right now, well, they never see any of this. And we can see that the central banking system, putting countries into debt and giving them more and more debt, it doesn't work. This has been going on since, 2008, 2009, and here we are in 2017, and their situation has not improved at all. Yes, they do have the ability to manipulate a lot of their statistics to make it look like things have improved a little bit and we're coming out of the recession with unemployment at 22%. But believe us, this is going to work this time. It doesn't work. It's proven it does not work. All it does is transfer all the wealth from the country over to the central bank. That's all it does. Now, something very interesting happened today. We saw that someone dumped $4 billion worth of gold futures onto the market. And that is over 30,000 contracts that were dumped, and it brought gold down. They also did the same thing with silver, where they dumped these contracts. And we pretty much know who it is, because the central banks right now, they can control everything. And this is what they've been doing all this time. They're controlling the entire market, the stock market, the bond market, the creation, of course, currency, the gold, silver, precious metals market. They need to control everything to keep the idea that everything is fine. The dollar is fine. The economy is fine. And what we're seeing right now is things are rapidly falling apart left and right. And we see right now that consumers, well, it looks like they are completely tapped out right now. And we saw that consumers were using their credit cards just to make ends meet, because more and more people are losing their jobs in retail and corporations. And what we're seeing right now is that, well, people, they've reached their limits in credit cards. They're not buying automobiles. They're not taking out student loans, because consumers hit the brakes on using credit. And what we're seeing at this point is that credit has declined since April. Now, credit cards, they rose around 1.5 million, far below the increase prior to 2 months ago. And we're seeing a sharp slowdown in non-revolving consumer credit, which just rose around 6.7 billion, which suggests that either auto loans or student loans, they've just ground to a halt, and that's it. So when we look a little bit closer at this, we see something very interesting. We see that the sources of consumer credit reveals that the U.S. government, long a dominant source of consumer debt, has virtually disappeared, which is very interesting. And it completely dried up. And this might be the reason. Now, we see additional asset bubbles. They are cracking, and we understand that there are many bubbles that are beginning to pop. Green Street's Commercial Property Index, which tracks the value of property owned by real estate investment trusts, well, that fell by 0.4% in May to the lowest since May of 2016. Now, one of the primary drivers of this decline are the values of retail malls that have been getting hit by store closing and bankruptcies of their tenants as brick and mortar retail is basically melting down right in front of our eyes. The sub-index for malls fell by 2.8% in May and 5% for the past 3 months, and is down year over year. Now, other weak areas are like apartment buildings, there's industrial space, warehousing. Now, the financial institutions that hold these loans, which amount to about $3.8 trillion, the ones that hold them are banks, which are holding about $2 trillion or 53% of the total, life insurance, which is holding about $460 billion or 12% of the total, government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae, they're holding about $521 billion or 14% of the total, and non-agency commercial mortgage-backed securities, which is about $544 billion or 14% of the total. In terms of banks, the problem is the smaller banks, less than $50 billion in assets, they're going to be on the hook. They hold about $1.2 trillion of these loans. Larger banks hold around $767 billion. In other words, exposure to a downturn, well, it could hit a lot of these smaller banks, and these smaller banks, they might go under. That's the biggest threat to all of this. Now, yesterday, we talked about the bail-in and how the Banco Popular was bailed in. And this is just the beginning. Remember all the different tests that the central bankers have done in the past, where they tried it in Cyprus, they bailed in those banks. They were going to bail in the Greek banks, but the people started to take their funds out of the bank, and they were like, whoa, we can't do a bail-in right now because a lot of those deposits were flowing out of the banks, and they were able to do it in Spain's sixth biggest bank. Now, what we're seeing is that there's many other banks that are in trouble, and we see that it looks like they're ready to go out and they're ready to have these bail-ins if something goes wrong. Now, the only thing the central banks are worried about this, and this is why they're not going to rush out and do this to like 50 or 10 or 5 banks at a time, because they're very worried about people taking their funds out of the bank. And this would be a problem just like in Greece. This is why the corporate media is really not making a real big deal about this. They're going to keep quiet about this because they don't want people to understand what is happening. And if they put this information out there, a lot of people would say, you know something, I don't trust this bank, let me take my funds out. And they don't want this to happen. This is one of the reasons why they wanted to get rid of cash, because it would make it easier for them to control it, because they just have to throw a switch and boom, everyone is frozen out of the bank. If you take your cash out, they can't do anything. Now, central banks, they have been preparing and protecting themselves for the last 9 years. And they've been controlling the markets to do just that. Right now, global central banks, they are on pace to buy $3.6 trillion worth of stocks and bonds this year alone. Now, at this point, the Swiss National Bank owns more publicly traded shares of Facebook than Mark Zuckerberg. And the Bank of Japan is now a top 5 owner in 81 different large Japanese firms. These global central banks, well, they're pumping a huge amount of money into the stock markets because this was the only way to keep the markets up. Now, think about this for a second. Since they've been pumping all this money into the stock markets around the world, they have vast holdings. They could use this to crash the markets. It'd be very easy. Yes, they do have the ability to push a button and bring down the markets. Yes, they could do that. But to make it look natural, to make it look like this is a natural occurrence, you wouldn't want to throw the switch. You would want to bring it down in a different way, showing that people are trying to leave the market. And it would be very easy for them to do. Remember how they purchased all of this. They created free money out of thin air and pumped it into the market. These aren't everyday investors. They own these corporations. So if stocks surge higher on any particular day, it's the central banks. If they bring them down, it's the central banks. It's not the everyday person. They've been trying to bring in the everyday person to take a lot of these stocks, but the everyday person, they are not doing it. This is their major problem. And we can see over the last 9 years, the central banks around the world, those 1%, the deep state, they have been protecting themselves, creating legislation, making sure that everything that they have is protected. That's what the bail-in documents are about. Think about it in this way. They created the documents to protect their investments, not to protect the people, but to protect their investments. They put countries into debt, and they steal their assets. They take their gold, they take their silver, they take their properties. And if you think that the deep state, the central banks don't have gold, they do. And they're holding on to it. One of the reasons why they keep gold prices so low is so they can accumulate as much as they possibly can. It also distorts the market. It also makes it look like their system is doing very well. This has all been done on purpose because they knew back in 2008 that their system was going to die. They knew that eventually all of this debt that was created, everything that we see, was just an illusion. The illusion will come to an end. Just like in 2008, it came to an end, but they pumped it back up. Now there's legislation that is not allowing them to actually do these bailouts where the government borrows a lot more from them and pumps it in to corporations to keep them afloat. The central bank already used all the stimulus to pump up the entire economy. It is all failing right now. This is where we are out. They have protected themselves. They have all the hard assets, and the rest of the country has been living in an illusion that everything is fine, that we don't need to hold gold or silver, we don't need to have anything of substance, just hold on to paper. And this is where everyone is going to get burned. This is why you need to be ready and prepared for what is coming, because the central banks, the deep state, the 1%, they have been protecting themselves. They've been preparing for this moment. And since they have the assets, since they have the land, since they have the gold, guess who's going to be calling the shots? Well, they're going to be calling the shots because they have the wealth, unless something is done. And I think this is what we're in process of something being done to change this, to get rid of the central banking system. And if you notice, Trump has been deregulating. He's been reviewing land. He's going to probably approach and implement and put back Glass-Steagall. He's getting rid of Dodd-Frank. And you can see all of this is happening right now. And again, the corporate media doesn't like this. The central banks don't like this. They don't like any of this happening right now because it's destroying their system. And every time it's destroyed, they come out and they tell you how bad it's going to be. Just like with the Brexit vote. Remember all that talk? Well, the whole thing is going to fall apart. You won't be able to survive. The country will plummet into a depression. And we had the Brexit vote, and the people said we want to be voted away. We don't want to be part of the central bank. And what happened? Nothing. Iceland actually put their bankers in jail and got rid of that corrupt system. And if you notice, the corporate media never really reports on how their economy is doing. Their economy is doing absolutely fantastic compared to the rest of the world that is still under the control of the private Western central banking system, where nobody went to jail. And we could see right now they took this time to prepare, to flood the world with debt, to steal the assets. So you need to be prepared for what is about to happen. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.